I'm going to be talking to Regan Boychuk of the Polluter Pay Federation from Alberta about problems with a royalty credit scheme to fund well cleanup in Alberta that is being floated by Premier Danielle Smith. It has a bit of a odd history and is being panned by many people, including Regan. So, Regan, welcome to the interview.
Thanks for having me, Markham.
Now, look, for many of the viewers of this video, they're not going to be familiar with the intricacies of the issue. So please give us a very simple, concise explanation of why this is such a bad idea.
The reason is because the way the oil industry operates, most of its costs are paid for with free oil. In Alberta, that's our oil that belongs to the citizens. And so when it comes to the oil sands, all development, everything they build, all the dump trucks is all paid for with free oil. In 2016, Alberta extended that royalty regime to traditional oil and gas, where all costs are paid for with free oil and gas. So now all the horizontal drilling that takes place, it's unprofitable. It still gets all it costs paid with free oil and gas up front. It's scandalous. It's a really strange system for anyone to be giving away their resources in such a way. What the R-Star program does is take the last tiny little bit, 5 cents of every dollar is all the public gets for our resources. And R-Star proposes giving that 5 cents back to industry so they can pay for the cleanup that they're legally obliged to do, have promised to do, will tell us today they're going to do. But in the short of it, the scandalous royalties in Alberta have us collecting 5 cents of every dollar of our oil and gas. This would give it back for cleanup. It's beyond ridiculous.
Oh, okay. So your point here is that the oil and gas companies get credits. They're not required to pay any royalties till the capital costs are paid. I think that's what you mean when you say that basically the taxpayer pays for they get free oil at the beginning, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So now what happened here is that prior to being selected as leader of the United Conservative Party, Danielle Smith had resigned her job as a talk show host, radio host in Calgary in 2021, and then she became, we'll call her a lobbyist for the group, the Alberta Enterprise Group, and she was lobbying for this this idea called R-Star, where the oil and gas companies would get royalty credits to pay for their reclaiming their depleted oil and gas wells. And so you're arguing that, and we should point out that Professor Andrew Leach has had a piece published in the CBC also opposing this. But these are obligations that they are already in law. They are required to pay for out of their own revenue. Why would the Premier then suggest that the public should pay for this?
Because despite what the law says, and despite what logic and justice might say about who should pay for this, Alberta regulators made a secret bargain with industry in 1991, saying, no look backs. We'll let you sell or give away your old wells to whoever you want. We won't stop you. And we've lived up to it for 30 years. We've never stopped anyone from the crime of giving away things to insolvent companies. We've allowed that. But the very explicit black letter law bargain by regulators was, we'll let you go wild. We won't make the polluter pay like they tried in 1990. We'll let you go. But you will fund all resulting orphans. That was the bargain. It was explicit, understood by everyone. It's codified in Section 11 of the Oil and Gas Conservation Act about the Orphan Fund, which fully funds the plugging, remediation, and reclamation of all orphan wells immediately by all existing remaining licensees. It's the bargain they designed in exchange for polluter pay. We tried polluter pay, the industry bucked, we chickened out, we made this bargain. We've lived up to the bargain for 30 years. Now it's time for the orphan well to start funding things. They don't want to. R star is the alternative. The solution to this issue is existing Alberta law. We have the orphan fund. We have the orphan levy. It's been on the books for 20 years. It is the existing law. If we followed it, we would have full funding for every orphan well.
Now, I'm going to quoting Professor Leach here. He says that $1 million worth of required cleanup would net R-star credits that reduce royalties by roughly $280,000. So if the cleanup costs are $1 million, you get $280,000 back. 28% of your costs are covered by out of royalties at today's prices of $110 per barrel. Now, okay, so essentially we're giving all of that money back. What was particularly scandalous about this is that these are, they're not record high, but they're very, very high oil prices. So the companies are awash in cash to begin with. If there was ever a time in Alberta's history when they could afford to fund their own cleanup, today is the day.
Well, you have to make an important distinction. There's the oil sands and there's oil and gas. Prices are high. Bitumen companies in the oil sands are drowning in money. They don't have cleanup. They don't have pressing issues. Those are long-term projects, a different program. Oil and gas, prices are high. They're still not profitable. Outside of the oil sands, the industry has not turned a profit since 2009. Nobody disputes that. They don't have profits to fund it. That's why we can't make them clean up. There is a lot of money washing around, and that's why the very smart Alberta legislatures saw this, foresaw it, and designed the orphan fund that takes the money from the SAGD producers under the bargain they designed themselves and uses that to fund orphans. The only reason that beautiful, perfect, it's the only way this can work at the end of the game is the safety net of the orphan fund. It's the only way, but it doesn't work because our captured regulator does not designate orphans. There are tens of thousands of wells that are obvious orphans, but unless they're designated, they don't get put on the list and they don't even get tried to be funded. That is the missing link. And if anyone wants to carefully read Mrs. Smith's proposals, the R-star is directed at those worst of the worst companies to give them the majority of the benefit. That is the scandalous part. She picks the majority of benefits for her subsidies, and it's $1 to $1. It's $1 million of credit for $1 million of cleanup, despite Mr. Leach's confusion. It's straight across the board, and it's directed at companies that have zero production today. These are the screaming shady. What on earth are these companies? They've been there for many years. They hold 9,000 licenses. They have no money, no revenue. And that's where Smith wants to send the money. And whatever calculations Mr. Leach is confused about doing is irrelevant. It's a full subsidy for every dollar, but these shady companies get to trade it off to other guys. And there's even a worse program. She has a second pilot. If anyone reads this program, there's a second pilot program the new premier suggests, and it's twice as bad. But apparently nobody's read this letter yet.
My goodness, this is like an onion. And the more you peel it, the more layers there are. Now, look, Premier Smith, I find this only in Alberta could an oil and gas lobbyist be promoting a scheme like this, become premier, and then bald-facedly, instruct her energy minister to put in place a pilot and to begin implementing this. This ought to be scandalous, and I'm sure that 10, 20 years ago, it would have been scandalous, but in today's political environment, it hardly merits a blink, which is, I don't understand it. But anyway, let's go on. There's a point here that needs to be clarified for viewers who aren't familiar with this issue, and that is that it's been common practice for decades for larger companies to take depleted wells and sell them to small companies that are barely solvent, and then those companies go bankrupt and the orphan wells get thrown onto the Orphan Well Association. Or, as you point out, the regulator just leaves them in limbo and doesn't designate them as orphans, which means that all they've done is kick the can down the road for who knows how many. What's your estimate of the bill that's coming for those wells that are in limbo?
Well, just as a back of the napkin, the most obvious candidates are those 9,000 licenses sitting with shell companies for many years with no production. That's 9,000 of the worst of worst wells. Those should all be designated as orphans. And if we followed the law, that would mean this year the orphan levy wouldn't be $70 million. It'd be 4 or 5 billion. And that is a lot of money, but that is the program, the system that industry designed in alternative to a polluter pay. And it's a tiny fraction of today's profits, mostly, almost entirely from the oil sands this year, after they paid corporate taxes and paid their royalties. 150 billion will be put in mostly foreign shareholders' pockets this year. So a $5 billion orphan levy might sound like a lot, but it happens to be the existing law under a bargain approved and designed by CAP and CPAC. And so that's Polluter Pays Federation's proposal, that we follow the existing law. We'd like to get law professors and politicians on board with this idea. We're yet to do it, but it is the obvious solution. We're not going to get new legislation, but this is already waiting for us. It's really hard to argue against, and it could fund the cleanup today, get people back to work. Any other scheme is just a way around the law. That's the problem. We have polluter pay law, and the courts are on our side. So they need a scheme to come around it. It's just laughable how silly it is. This was rejected by the NDP Department of Energy. It was rejected by the UCP's Department of Energy. And the energy minister in June 2021 explicitly said that the government had rejected R-Star. But I met with Ms. Smith a couple weeks later, and she told me she had the ear of the energy minister Savage. And later, when inviting me to join her pilot project, in her letter from the end of July, says that the energy minister had approved a pilot project 1 month after she'd explicitly, on behalf of the government, rejected it. So it is a very curious timeline where this lobbyist gets handed the keys to the governing party, is sworn in. And my friends and I have been saying R-Star is a flaming red hot scam since July, when we first learned about the gentleman who's our new energy minister promoting it in the legislature, Smith lobbying with me. And you, Markham, are the first journalist who's asked some questions about this. You, of all these weeks, of all this effort of raising a screaming hot, she's been the premier. She was sworn in as the sole executive of the provincial branch of government until her cabinet joined her. She's running the show, trying to be brought down. And our fear is that R-Star is a piñata. It's a boogeyman to make heroes out of people. But at the end of the day, if we don't address 5 cents a dollar royalties, or the secret no look back deal, which makes a joke of anything else we do, if those are not debatable, if they're not on the table, if we can't change those, the rest is window dressing.
Okay, I'm sure that there are. What I may do at some point, Regan, is get a panel together. At least 2 or 3 people. You might be one, and maybe somebody from the industry side or the regulator side, so we could have a really good debate about this. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I have read analyses from global consultancies like Wood Mackenzie who are saying, look, peak oil demand is coming. Prices are going to crash at some point, probably in the 2030s. And they are arguing, and these are companies like Wood Mackenzie that, count Shell and the other super majors as clients. And they say, we are advising our clients to take the 2020s when prices are going to be high and you're awash in cash, take them, strengthen your balance sheets, pay down debt, and begin to invest in low carbon businesses. Okay, because the gravy train ain't gonna last forever. So that's the considered advice of a variety of these experts. And what that means for Alberta is that there are basically 7 or 8 years where the prices, companies are going to have the cash, or the industry has the cash somewhere, and it has the cash flow to do this job, to address liabilities, the tailings pond, orphan wells, the wells that are in limbo. If this opportunity is missed, it'll be a disaster for the Alberta taxpayer down the road.
Absolutely. And that's my main message. And that's some of what they're hinting at there, is that there is still enough money left in the ground. The oil and gas, 300,000 wells a century, nothing saved. They're not, but with the oil sands, Alberta still has enough future profit that we can address these issues. If we smartened up, we don't have to tax anyone, we don't have to prosecute anyone, we don't have to beat anyone in court. We apply existing law and we use future profits to fund cleanup. That's the bargain CPAC and CAP agreed to in October 2000. Future profits to fund cleanup. We've gotten off track, but if we still lived up to that, we could still clean all this up, take care of everyone properly like they were Canadians, and make the transition. There is enough money, 150 billion this year. The problem is it's all going into pockets. But these are our resources. Under Law Heat and Getty, we acted like it. But if polluter pay isn't on the table, then I can give up and just play with my kids, because there's no other outcome. If the polluter isn't paying, our future is very, very dark. If we act like we own it, like we have ATB, our own bank, like we're in control of trillions of dollars of valuable resources that have a very soon expiry date, that can be managed effectively. All this can be funded equitably without taking anything from anyone. It's not too late here in Alberta.
Well, Regan, thank you very much for this. I have no doubt that we'll be doing future interviews about this issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markham.